Let's consider how predetermined overhead rate is calculated, but also how it's used in a service organization setting. So in this particular situation, what we've got is a setting, we've got a consulting firm called Charlie's Consulting. At the beginning of the month, they had two incomplete consulting engagements, two incomplete jobs, job CBS 132 and job CBS 135. At Charlie's Consulting, they have two different types of costs. They've got labor cost provided by their associates, their consulting associates, and they have overhead cost. For job 132 at the beginning of the month, they had $38,420 in labor cost associated. In 135, they had $28,380. All right, during the month, jobs CBS 132 and CBS 135 were completed but not billed to customers. The completion of CBS 132 required an additional $33,000 in associate labor, and job 135, an additional $100,500 in associate labor was incurred. During the month, there was only one new job, CBS 136. It was started, but it was not finished. The total direct labor cost for all jobs amounted to $187,300 for the month. So above, I heard about the direct labor cost for two jobs. Now I've got the total for the month, and there's only one other job, so I should be able to infer how much direct labor was charged to CBS 136 job. Overhead in this company refers to the cost of work that's not directly traced to particular jobs. So there's some work that's done. We don't trace all that work to this particular jobs. That includes supplies, copying, printing, travel costs to meet with clients. Charlie's Consultants decided we're not going to trace those items to jobs. We're just going to put them in one big pool, call it overhead, and then we're going to associate it with those jobs through an allocation. Overhead is applied at a rate of 75% of associate labor cost. What that means is for every $1 of labor cost, $1 direct labor cost, Charlie's Consulting is going to apply, that is associate or allocate, 75 cents of overhead. So every $1 of labor cost is tied to 75 cents worth of overhead. They've used that rate for many months and it's not changed. So that means at some point in time, that ratio between overhead costs and associated labor costs was about 0.75 to 1. And so they use that to apply this to particular jobs. Now, the reason you might want to apply that overhead cost to a job is maybe when you finish the job, then you turn around and look at your costs and you use that in billing your customer. Or maybe your pricing with the customer was determined independently of your costs. And when the job finishes, you want to know how much money did we make on the job. So I need to know how much labor costs and I need to know how much overhead we've associated using this pattern of associating labor costs that Charlie's Consulting has adopted. Actual overhead for the month was $137,610. So we incurred $137,610 during the month. We've associated amounts to individual jobs as those jobs were conducted. And oftentimes, in fact, almost all the time, the amount of the actual overhead and the amount of the overhead that's associated with jobs differs. There's going to be a difference between the two. It would only be identical, the actual overhead and the applied overhead would only be identical in a very rare circumstance where our overhead is very, very predictable. It's almost always going to be over-applied or under-applied. What we're trying to do over the long pull is to end up with about zero, not over-applied, not under-applied, but the amount of overhead costs is going up and down, and the association is not a predetermined association. So we're just basically ballparking it. Now, from an accounting standpoint, that gives us a challenge because what we're going to do is we're going to allocate costs to jobs as those jobs are being performed and completed. And we're also actually spending money on these overhead items, the items they listed above, supplies, copying, printing, etc. So we're going to end up with an over or an under application. And then we have an accounting challenge as to what do we do with that difference there. What they've asked us to do here is to say what are the costs of jobs 132 and 135 at the beginning of the month based on the associated labor that they gave us, and when those jobs are completed, because they've told us there was additional labor incurred on those jobs. Part B, what's the cost of job 136 at the end of the month? Recall that 136 was started during the month and completed during the month. So, or I'm sorry, not completed, but started during the month. And we need to determine the cost already on job 136 as of the end of the month. And then the final question they ask us is, how much was the under or over applied service overhead for the month? So that's the challenge we have in front of us. So, all right, so let's look at the cost of jobs at the beginning of the month. I've got job 132. At the beginning of the month, that job has $38,000, 420 cents worth of labor. And we don't know, or they didn't give us, what the overhead was for that. But I think we can compute that. So we can say, in that cell, we can say equal this amount here for the direct labor cost, and then multiply by 0.75. That's going to give us the overhead cost applied to job 132. And we can do the same thing here with the next job times 0.75, and that gives us a number as well. And if we want to see the total cost of those jobs, I can say equal sum, and I can sum the two items to the left, and I can go back up here. If I want to replicate that formula in the next cell, I can just use the little smart button to do that. Now, let's just check that. 38,000 plus 29,000. Yes, that sounds like about 67,000. And I can look up here at the formula, and the formula looks like there's nothing unusual about the formula. Likewise, with the next one, 28 plus 21, that sounds like about 49. That's what's computed here. We got a pretty straightforward sum, C7 plus D7. And so we have an answer there. So what we could do here is to just make reference to the little calculations we did up above. And just carry those numbers down there. Now, the cost when the jobs are completed. Okay, so for job 132, I need to add $33,000 worth of labor. And then I need to allocate some overhead for that one as well. So what I could do, there's a few different ways I could work this with my spreadsheet. I could just pick up this amount and add to that $33,000 multiplied by 0.75. And just to make sure that my math operations are done in the order that I intend, I'm going to use the parentheses. That's not necessary because the order that Excel uses is the standard order of math operations. But if somebody else is going to come in and pick up your spreadsheet, it's nice to see this written in this fashion because it makes it a little more obvious what you're doing there. All right, we can do the same thing here. I can go ahead and pick up the beginning of the month balance, and I'm going to add to that, in this case, $100,500 in direct labor cost plus 1.75, or I could say 1 plus 0.75. And I can see that I didn't do that right, so let's just go back here. This should be 1.75, and this should be multiplied rather than added. And I don't need that parentheses there because I've got the outside parentheses. and I can enter there. Let's see, does that make sense? Now, the 124,000 is greater than the 67. That's what I expected because I had additional costs. What I've added is $33,000 plus 75% of $33,000. So 75% of $33,000 must be somewhere in the ballpark of $24,000. So I've added about $57,000. I get the 67. If I add another 57 to it, yeah, that sounds like it's going to put me in that range. And let's just check our formula here. F29 plus 33,000 times 1.75. That's the 33,000 for the direct labor cost. That's the one. And then the 0.75 is for the associated overhead cost. If we go over here, we see G29. We see the 100,500 that came from here on row 11. And again, multiplied by 1.75. That's one time for the direct labor cost and 0.75 for the overhead cost. All right, that should work. So let's tackle then part B, the cost of job 136 at the end of the month. Recall that we started job 136 during the month, but we didn't finish it. We incurred $187,300 in labor cost. So what I can do is I need to pick up the labor cost plus the overhead that's associated with that job. So I can say equal 187,300. And I can multiply that by 1. That's for the direct labor cost plus 0.75. But now wait a minute. That 187,300 is the total direct labor cost for the month. So that's not right because I already had some labor costs for 2 other jobs during the month. I had the labor cost for job 132 and job 135. Job 132 required 33,000 and job 135 required 100,500. So now what I've got is the 187,300 in direct labor costs for all jobs, subtracting the 33,000 for job 132 and subtracting the 100,500 for job 135, and that's going to give me the remaining direct labor costs, which then will associate with job 136, and we'll add to that the overhead cost. And I believe I can hit enter here looking at that formula, and let's just go up and check that formula. We get the 187,300 minus the 33,000 minus the 100,500, and then we'll multiply that times 1.75. And that'll give us the total cost for job 136 during the month of $94,150. Now, here's the challenge, part B. We need to know whether the overhead was overapplied or underapplied. So I'm going to do a little schedule down here just to see. So on job 132, how much overhead did we apply during the month? Well, let's see. For job 132, we had 33,000 in labor. So we applied 33,000 times 0.75. Oops, no, 0.75. I said it right, but I typed it wrong. And then on job 135, we had direct labor cost of 100,500 times 0.75. That was our overhead. So that's our overhead applied for those 2 jobs during the month. Now let's look at job CBS 136. CBS 136, we had we had the difference between the 187,300 and the 38 420 minus the 28,310. So let's just go ahead and do that calculation from scratch then. Let's say equals 187,300 minus 33,000 minus 100,500. And just to check that, I'm just going to hit enter here so I can see what the value looks like. Let's see. So I got a total of 187,300. I had direct labor cost on the first job of 33,000, on the second job of 100,500. So that must be my total direct labor cost for the month. Now I can just go back in here. I'm going to put parentheses around this so that I know the order of the mathematical operations. So that's my direct labor cost. I can multiply that by 0.75, and that will give me my overhead that's been allocated during the month. Now, if I come in here now and sum that, what I will have is that much overhead that was assigned to jobs during the month. Now, I had actual overhead during the month of 137,610. So I'm going to put 137,610 here. And what I know then is I applied 144.75. I incurred an actual of 137,610. And so the difference is, minus that, is 28.65. And I applied 140, but I incurred 137, so I can say over applied. And I'll just go down here and pick up that number from right there. And that's my 28.65. So again, with our predetermined overhead rate, we don't know how much the overhead's going to be for the month. We don't want to wait till the end of the month to find out. We need to go ahead and put numbers on these jobs now. So we're going to take past relationships between, in this instance, labor cost and overhead cost. So where you're going to use that 75 cents on the dollar ratio.